I want to talk about logically follows from her topic. I want to talk about the three characteristics. The three characteristics, tilakkhana, or three marks of existence, three signs, three marks, three characteristics, is a concept that is very important, very central to understanding the Buddha's Dhamma, and it has a particular relation point to the practice of vipassana, because it is essentially when you are seeing things in that way that is correct vipassana, then you are naturally seeing the three characteristics. And in fact, it could be used as a test about how well you are doing, if you are tending to see things in terms of the three characteristics or otherwise. The three characteristics are Dukkha, Anicca, Anatta, usually translated suffering, impermanence, and not self. And seeing their opposites is called the vipalasas, or the hallucinations. So it's a wrong seeing. So you're either seeing according to reality, or you're seeing according to hallucinations. And the vipalasas are a great source of our misery in the world. There's an analogy given. One of the Buddha's parables is the vipalasas are like a decoy set up by a hunter, a deer made of straw and sticks put in the middle of a clearing, and then the hunters hide in the brush at the edge of the clearing, and the deers come and see the decoy and say, "This is a safe place. Here there is a deer," and they come into the clearing to their destruction. And the hunter is like Mara, the tempter, and the decoy is like the vipalasa. So the three characteristics in this sense are a quality of how we perceive the world, but they are also in the Buddhist teachings a metaphysical or existential statement about the way the world actually is. And it's useful to bear in mind both these aspects, the subjective and the objective. The characteristic of dukkha is usually given first. It's often translated, most common translation is suffering. As often when we're dealing with the Buddhist teachings and looking at them closely, it's good advice not to rely too much on the connotations of the English translation, because very often it's not quite right. And it's definitely the case here. The word suffering in some contexts works well as a translation for dukkha, and in others it does not. And using the word suffering as a translation for dukkha has led to a characterization of Buddhism as a gloomy kind of philosophy. Someone asked me once at a talk I was giving, a question from the floor, someone asked, "Why do Buddhists always talk about suffering?" My first answer was, well, that's not fair. We also talk about other stuff like pain, grief, misery, lamentation, and despair. Before I attempted to actually clarify what dukkha means. Dukkha is points to an aspect of reality that the phenomena that occur in the world and to our as objects and then become objects of consciousness are inherently imperfect, unsatisfactory, provisional, incomplete. There's something lacking. And as I remarked before, there's a subjective and an objective aspect to this. It's not just, it is true that our perception is of these things as being imperfect and unsatisfactory, but it's not just a problem of our perception, it's a problem of the existential reality. That's the way things actually are. Conditioned phenomena in the world are inherently imperfect, incomplete, provisional. There's something lacking. So an alternate translation often given for dukkha is unsatisfactory or unsatisfactoriness, which again is not bad in many contexts, but it does highlight that subjective aspect, and it can lead to the misunderstanding that it's just a problem of our perception. We tend to see things in that way, but actually things are perfect as they are. They're not. They're intrinsically imperfect, intrinsically incomplete, intrinsically unable to satisfy. There's an incompleteness, a provisional quality in the phenomena, that is one of the very important factors in driving the engine of samsara. Dukkha occurs as the first noble truth, the noble truth of dukkha. And the second noble truth is the noble truth of the origin of dukkha, which is craving, tanha. What we could say, what is happening, the actual reality of samsaric existence is that the mind at each moment is driven by craving to attempt to find satiation, satisfaction, or completeness. And it takes an object. And the object is inherently, intrinsically unable to satisfy. It's incomplete. It's provisional, it's transitory, it's not quite good enough. So the mind is left still hungry. Now, the literal meaning of tanha is thirst. The mind is still thirsty. And the next moment it immediately seeks another object. So there's this driven quality to the mind. This is the motive engine that keeps samsara in existence. This is what we're doing moment by moment. The mind craving to find some kind of completion or satiation reaches out for an object. The object fails to provide that satisfaction because it's inherently unable to do so. And in the next moment, the mind is again reaching for an object. This is a process in more detail explained in the dependent origination. And the Four Noble Truths, the first two truths are a shorthand version of this. This is the description of samsara, suffering and craving that work together as an engine to keep us in the samsaric existence moment by moment. So dukkha occurs in each moment with each phenomenal object, with each sankhara. It's an intrinsic quality, a universal quality. This is what the characteristics or the marks are. They're the universal attributes or marks of samsaric existence. And this is why the translation suffering is inadequate, because our experience as human beings is not entirely suffering. It is entirely dukkha. But in the human existence, there is a balance or a mix of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. I would think that very likely, if you could possibly keep a running tally of all your moments through your life, that the neutral moments would be by far the majority. But there are pleasant moments as well as unpleasant. But they're all dukkha, in that they're all unsatisfactory, incomplete. Nothing is perfect. The mind is always left wanting more, even after the most wonderful, pleasant experiences, of a worldly manner. The mind is still unsatisfied and still wants more, something different, something else. It's not possible to satiate the craving mind with experience. And remember that this is a problem, it's an issue from both sides, both from the subjective and the objective side. Subjectively, we're unable to be satisfied. Not objectively, the world is unable to satisfy us, intrinsically by its nature. There's a idea I came across once in a book about Tibetan Buddhism. Made the argument that if there were one object in samsara that was capable of fully satisfying the mind, the universe would have ceased to exist aeons ago, because all consciousness would eventually find that object and cease to move again. Whether it's an intriguing idea, whether or not it bears logical scrutiny, I'm not sure. So the dukkha applies to pleasant moments, unpleasant moments, and neutral moments. The dukkha that applies to unpleasant moments is called dukkha dukkhata. That's dukkha per se, or dukkha as dukkha. This is the poke in the eye with a sharp stick kind of dukkha. This is a thumb smashed in the well kind of dukkha. There's no difficulty understanding the point of that. Viparinama dukkha is the dukkha of change, of falling away, and it's the dukkha that applies particularly to pleasant moments, because the pleasant moments and this segues into the next characteristic, which is impermanence, which I'll get to, but is one of the reasons that pleasant moments are imperfect is because they don't last. You know, that there's left that lingering despair at loss. But they're also imperfect, incomplete. They're not perfectly pleasant. Then there's the dukkha of dukkha as a characteristic, which is the dukkha applying particularly to neutral moments, the inherent dukkha of all phenomena, the inherent incompleteness, provisional, unsatisfactory quality. Anicca is the second characteristic, second mark. It means impermanence, and that, in this case, that translation is quite adequate. It's literal. You know, nicca is permanent, and as the negative prefix. So anicca is impermanent. It recognizes the quality of all sankaras, all conditioned phenomena, to be transient, that nothing whatsoever lasts or is intrinsically permanent or stable. And that can be looked at and understood at different levels. You know, there's the level of or time scales. We could look at the level of a human life, and is very important meditation in the Buddhist literature is maranasati, contemplation of death, reminding ourselves that I too shall die, and to be aware of the human lifespan as uncertain, impermanent. We don't know when death is coming. We don't know how it's coming, but we just know that it is coming. And the human life is an impermanent thing. And there's every other scale of time we can see impermanence. Sometimes I think it's useful to turn the mind to considering larger time scales, the kind of geological or cosmological impermanence, that the seas and the oceans and the continents are shifting and changing and moving, and the sun is eventually going to burn out. That everything is everything that we take naively as a permanent background to our existence is actually in a constant state of flux at a scale beyond our own. But the most important time scale to look at is the momentary scale. That the phenomena of the sankaras are rising and falling, coming into existence and ceasing momentarily. And this is something that we can directly observe when we do the meditation and watch the contents of the mind. And we watch how transient and how much in flux the objects in the mind are. It's a central idea of the Abhidhamma description of reality that things only exist momentarily, that they come into existence and pass out of existence, and in a causal chain, one thing causing another. For example, one of the books says that, talking about physical level of reality that motion is impossible. What we perceive of as motion is successive arising at adjacent locations. This was the classical Buddhist way of looking at reality, things flashing in and out of existence momentarily. And we can see that with mind objects very directly. It may seem that things persist, but if we look closely, we see them constantly shifting and changing. And they're related to one another by a process of cause and effect. So that there's a sense of continuity, but it's not a continuity of substance, but a continuity of cause and effect. The third characteristic is the characteristic of anatta, or not self, which is the subtlest of the three, and it's the one that causes the most conceptual difficulty at first glance. It's also the one that is peculiar to Buddhism. This is the peculiar philosophical contribution of Buddhism in India was this understanding of not self. In the general principle is sunya, or emptiness, which is the emptiness of all dhammas, but the particular practical aspect emphasized by the Buddha was anatta, the non-presence of an abiding entity, or the subjective quality. There are a couple of ways to approach this by thinking, thinking about it. It can only be really understood or realized by direct experience, completely understood, but it can be approached from a couple of directions. One is using a method of analysis. This is given in the first instance by the teaching on the five khandha, and in more detail in the Abhidhamma analysis, which breaks them down further. The idea is we look at the human mind-body system in detail, and we don't anywhere find a self. A very famous simile is given in the Milinda Panya, the Questions of King Milinda, that illustrates this idea. The Milinda Panya it's a very interesting book if you haven't encountered it. It's historically it's a quite interesting book because it's the first real account we have of interchange between Eastern and Western philosophy. The monk Nagasena was a Buddhist monk, and he's in dialogue with King Milinda, who was the king of one of the Greek kingdoms established by Alexander the Great in northwest India. So Milinda was educated in Hellenistic philosophy, and he's in dialogue with the Buddhist monk. So it's quite an intriguing historical document on that level. And there's a big section on Anatta, or not self. And the repeated refrain is that the king always asks Nagasena to give a simile. Give a simile, venerable sir. And Nagasena, will, in this case, he said, you arrived here today, O king, in this chariot. If we were to take this chariot apart, we would have here the boards, here the wheel, here the axle, here the seat, and so on. We'd have a pile of parts. And where would you then say is the essence of the chariot? And the king said, well, there's no essence of chariot. Chariot is only a conventional name that we use, a designation when these parts are arranged in such and such a way. Then we call it a chariot. Well, so it is, O king, the human organism. There is just this conscious mind, feelings, perceptions, karma formations, and body. And when they are arranged together, functioning in a certain way, we call this a human being. But you can nowhere find the essence of a being. You know? And we can take this analysis of the five, this is the five aggregates, you know, the five khandha, and we can break, and they're called aggregates. Khandha means like bundle or pile, and they're called that because they can be broken down further. We can determine individual moments, individual parts and pieces, individual factors that are more at a finer grain of looking than the five. Now there's, in the Abhidhamma, there's 50 sankaras, 89 kinds of consciousness. So we can break it down further, but nowhere do we find, you know, the essential essence of a human being. There is no atta. There is no self. And this idea is also expressed metaphorically in the Zen story of the man looking for the owner of the empty house and not finding him. And then the question is, who is doing the looking? So it becomes then a kind of infinite regress. Every time you think you have the answer, you say, then if this is the self, then who's looking at that and deciding that's the self? Then there's another behind that. So there is no actual end point. There is no final aspect that we can call the self, the quintessential self. No? So this one way of approaching the idea of not self is by looking for it and not finding it through this analysis into finer parts. The other method is the method of synthesis, of looking at things relationally. Instead of getting smaller and smaller, we go bigger and bigger, and we see that nothing exists as a self-contained entity, that everything exists only as reflections of causes and conditions. Things exist because of other things, and there's no way you can isolate anything as a perfectly unique standalone unit, because it only exists as a reflection of other things. There's a saying, nothing exists from its own side, which I think is a very powerful expression of that. In Mahayana Avatangsa Sutra, there's the analogy given of King Indra's net. This is magical decoration, this jeweled net that King Indra has in his palace, of all this weave of three-dimensional weave of netting, and at each junction point there's a jewel. And each jewel has many facets, and in each facet, if you look at it, you can see a reflection of the entire net, including all the jewels and including that jewel and all its facets. And it's another infinite regress. And this is an illustration of the infinitely interrelated nature of things. And when that's understood, that also undermines the idea of self as a unitary entity. Now, if we apply this practically to ourselves as body-mind organisms, the body is impossible to exist without relationship to other things. First of all, it's built up. It's, as the text, the ancient text says, born of mother and father, built of rice and gruel. So first of all, there's the genetic contribution of the parents to begin the body. And then the body is built and maintained by food and air and water. And it's constantly exchanging material with the universe. It's not. It's impossible to exist as a standalone entity. All the time we're breathing in and out. We're exchanging molecules with the external world. And the mind, we might think as being contained, but if you think about it a little more, it's not at all. That our ideas, our thoughts, the very language we speak is determined by inputs from outside. We learn our original language, you call it the mother tongue, because we learn it at our mother's knee, and we learn it as a child, and then we might learn additional languages when we're an adult, but they come to us from outside, and then all our thoughts are framed in that way, and our thoughts are built up of what we've read, what we've heard. We're constantly rearranging elements that we've received from elsewhere. So the mind is interdependent with other minds and the external world as well. So when we are practicing Vipassana meditation, we're looking at phenomena arising to the mind successively. At each moment, there's the conscious mind is taking some object. And if the object is seen correctly, it's seen intrinsically according to these three characteristics. And this is the liberating way of seeing things. We can all know from experience, from meditating, that sometimes we get lost in our thought forms and our memories and so on. And that at those moments we're not seeing according to the three characteristics. Instead of seeing the phenomena as empty, we're seeing it as self. Seeing this is mine. This is my memory. This is my anxiety. This is my fear. And we're caught in it. But if we see it as empty, as just a phenomenon of the mind, it has no grip on us. It has no power. It's seen just as an object. It's seen purely objectively. And if we see them as impermanent, then they have no power to cause suffering, because we know it's coming, it's going, it's changing. It's not a burden that we are going to be holding forever. And if we know things as dukkha, then we don't expect them to be lasting, satisfying, wonderful. We see them just as incomplete phenomena. Then there's no hook. The mind is, if it truly sees the object as dukkha, it doesn't, it isn't hooked on it. It isn't clinging to it. It knows it just in its imperfect nature and lets it go. The experience of the world in the samsaric existence is like a kaleidoscope. You know, this is children's toy is like a telescope with little bits of broken glass, colored glass, and mirrors, and you turn it and you see different beautiful mandalas, and every time you turn it, it's a different image, but they're all made up of these little bits of broken glass. So it's like 3 pieces of broken glass, 3 characteristics. And each phenomena that arises is simply a rearrangement of those characteristics. And if we don't understand that, we can get fascinated with this, with the pretty pictures. And this is the beings in samsara. They're endlessly turning this wheel of this kaleidoscope. But each thing is just the same. It looks, superficially it looks infinitely different, but in reality it's just the 3 characteristics. So seen with that wisdom eye, there's no hook there. The mind is not fascinated or gripped by it, and there's a possibility of cessation, the possibility of not doing that anymore. This is a dispassion and disengagement that occurs in with repeated practice, and allows from a disengagement from samsaric experience. It said we don't see things all the time in that way because we're fooled. The characteristic of impermanence, we miss it because of the illusion of continuity. Because the universe is orderly and things arise according to causes and conditions, even though the phenomena only exist for a moment, successive phenomena are similar. One causes the other, and there's an appearance of continuity. There isn't just a random mess. There's an appearance of orderliness. And this creates an illusion of permanence, illusion of continuity. The factor of not self is not seen because of what's called the illusion of compactness. Our mind, as a shorthand, as a way of understanding the world, the mind separates the whole gestalt field of reality into discrete entities. So we see individual men, women, houses, cars, dogs, cats, trees. We have these entities that we take from the whole field of awareness and see as discrete entities, compact realities, rather than seeing things as an interdependent web of momentarily arising and ceasing factors. It's a way of making orderly sense of the world, but it's not a metaphysical or ontological level of reality. So that hides the void nature. The nature of dukkha is an interesting one. The other two we see are rather philosophical. What hides them, this sort of conceptual. But what hides dukkha is said to be change of postures. So we fidget our way out of dukkha. So that's why making an effort to sit still in meditation is useful as a way of looking at the dukkha, allowing that characteristic to manifest, to be looked at, rather than to be escaped. Because every time we shift the posture, then the constellation, the dukkha is a constant companion of the body. But every time we move, we change that constellation, and it's not evident then for some moments. A change is as good as a rest. And we have a different set of dukkha, so it's a little easier to bear for the moment. And each of these three characteristics, and before I go on to that, I could also say that this change of postures could also apply metaphorically on the mental level, that we fidget mentally as well, that we use thoughts and images and so on to escape from a mental quality of dukkha. And there's a kind of mental fidgeting that occurs as well. One other aspect of these three characteristics, that they mark the existence of samsara, and as I said, the correct vipassana is seeing things in this way. When it's said that when the mind penetrates any one of the three characteristics in depth, in totality, then that's a gateway to liberation. And it can go in any one of the three. That attaining liberation by in-depth penetration of dukkha is called being a body witness. With the characteristic of impermanence, anicca, it's called the signless liberation, animata. Animata is, in meditation terminology, animata is an image or a sign that the mind holds. So for breath meditation, it's the sense of touch. With a metta meditation, it's the feeling of metta in the heart. With with the nada sound, it's the oral, it's the sound of the high-pitched sound. So if there's no nimitta, then this is the signlessness. This is the penetration of impermanence, because the nimitta has a sense of stability, of continuity, and when there is no sense of continuity, of permanence, it's animata. It's the signless liberation. And the penetration of not self is the void liberation. That's the in-depth understanding of emptiness. Is the void liberation. So any one of the three can bring the mind through from samsara to nibbana, from the conditioned to the unconditioned. And one additional point to make, just to complete the theoretical description of the three characteristics, it should be mentioned that the first two, dukkha and anicca, apply to sankharas, the conditioned phenomena. And anatta applies to all dhammas, the conditioned and the unconditioned. So this makes the characteristic of anatta, or voidness, the most complete or the most universal. The characteristics of dukkha and anicca apply to everything in the phenomenal or sankhara, the conditioned world, things which arise according to causes and conditions, the samsara. Whereas anatta applies to that, and it also applies to the unconditioned. It also applies to nibbana, which is also void and without essence or self-existence. So it's the most universal characteristic is emptiness. So as a summary to bring it back down to the level of practice, when you are looking at the objects arising to the mind in meditation, the practical attempt should be made to see them as objects of consciousness and not identified with. And then the characteristics will become self-evident. It's not something that we try and it's not something that we really should be kind of imposing on the phenomena. We shouldn't be kind of thinking about it, philosophizing about the three characteristics when we're meditating. But we should be attempting to see them objectively and not identifying with them. There's where the attempt is made, and then the qualities of selflessness, of impermanence, and of unsatisfactoriness become evident naturally. And there then is no gripping of the mind, no loss of center, and no wandering off in the samsaric trails of proliferation. So I hope some of this is useful to you.